Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It happened. Donald Trump was sworn in as U.S. president for a second time after losing the 2020 election to Joe Biden. A huge political comeback with a very different inauguration day, and that might be setting the tone for the next 4 years. I'm Kris McCusker, and on this episode of The Big Story, we speak to Wayne Petrozzi, Professor Emeritus, Department of Politics and Public Administration at Toronto Metropolitan University. Now, there is a lot I want to cover here. I feel you are very qualified to comment on all of this. A very impressive resume. I assume you've seen a few inauguration speeches over the course of your career.
Yes.
Rate this one for us if you could. Unusual maybe would be one way to put it.
Well, it really wasn't what you would consider an inauguration speech. It essentially was an extended version of the stump speech he gave during the campaign. I mean, this is meant to be oratory. He failed.
I heard an observer also comment that a lot of what was in the speech was about himself rather than about the country. That part in and of itself unusual as well. Fair?
Yeah, that is fair. But in Mr. Trump's case, it's quite expected. That has been characteristic of his entire time in politics.
Some of the things mentioned, Mars. Did you ever think that the talk about planting a flag on Mars would come up?
No, that I think made a lot of people smile. He won't be alive when that happens.
Of course, if it happens as well.
Exactly.
There were some inaccuracies in there as well, which is sort of keeping with the Trump modus operandi. So how do you break that part down? What about that is concerning?
Well, it's typical. Inaccuracies are a trademark of all of his speeches. And he continued even past the inauguration speech, into the evening. If you don't, the case of Canada, first it was, we're going to have some studies done and we'll have a decision by April 1st in terms of tariffs for Canada, China, Mexico. Then later on in the evening, who knows why, February 1st, that's when Canada can expect tariffs. So he's all over the road, and people think that that's a kind of a characteristic of him, and they find it endearing. For most of us, it's troubling.
Some have also suggested that it could be a negotiating tactic. Our prime minister says that it's designed to sow chaos.
Yeah, I think that reads too much into it. He riffs all the time on whatever topic pops into his head. I would not put a great deal of any sense that he's thinking ahead 10 plays. He's not a chess player.
What was most lacking in that inauguration speech? What kind of consistently have you seen in an inauguration speech that was not there from this president?
There was no willingness to acknowledge that America is anything other than the most fantastic political system invented in the history of humankind. So there was no sense of humility, no sense of we have things to work on too, just like everyone else. This was a speech designed to convince Americans that they are unlike anyone else in the world.
And then talk on social media that he didn't actually touch the Bible when he took the oath of office.
No, for him, the Bible has been a prop. He used it as a prop against demonstrators during COVID. He uses religion as a prop in order to secure the votes of these Christian nationalists who think he's the agent of the coming of the next year.
Okay, I want to ask you about the pardons as well, because that got a lot of publicity and there's a lot of talk. And I expect there's going to be a lot of talk in the months to come around this. I mean, where do you even start with that? All of these pardons were offered to people involved in January 6th, some of them already in jail. Some trials hadn't started and they've now been thrown out. What do you make of all of that? I mean, a lot of people are asking why. Why would he do this?
Yeah, I think what it points to is he believed that people who support him are by definition patriots. That's the word he used for now the better part of 2 years to describe the people who attempted to subvert the vote counting process in the U.S. Congress. And in that sense, he thinks it's consistent. If they're patriots, they shouldn't be in jail.
I've heard some commentary as well that, he is the reason perhaps they ended up in jail, and that maybe there's a bit of a guilty conscience going on, and that's why he wanted to issue these pardons.
No, I don't think it's guilt. He thinks the election was stolen. He will take that belief to his grave. These people defended him, stood up for him, tried to make the case that the election was stolen.
Does it set a dangerous precedent?
There are all kinds of dangerous precedents in terms of what he has said and done. He intends to, I guess, in some fashion, take over a country that is currently independent, a member in good standing in the United Nations. I'm referring here to Panama. He has made it clear that American manifest destiny is now reborn in the 21st century with an eye, I suspect, also on Greenland. He has resurrected a notion really comes out of the mid 19th century of peoples that are special, either by view of religion, God picked them, or of history. They have a destiny to take all of North America into their hands. And the sense of national chauvinism. We are the best, we are the greatest, everyone else is in our shadows. That was, as said, quite common in the 19th century. And we thought had kind of disappeared in our time.
And you and I are speaking today. We are not American, but all of this, of course, will impact Canada and the rest of the world.
Well, I suspect we're going to have to be very mindful of our subservient position. And you're right, they are the most dominant economy. They have the most dominant military. And we're going to be very careful in how we react to them. So doing our homework, I think, is the best thing we can do right now so that we're ready for whatever he and his advisors ultimately decide.
There's also been talk that this administration is very different than the first administration, because the first time around, there were reasonable, long-time politicians in positions of power, whereas this time around, it feels more like there are people who will carry out Trump's wishes. So this administration is likely to be different. Do you have concerns about that the U.S. president has kind of surrounded himself with people that won't say no?
Certainly, we should all be concerned by that. And what I think contributes even more to that sentiment is when he won the first election, even he was prepared to acknowledge in his lighter moments that it was almost like an accident. This time, he firmly is of the belief that he wants a massive mandate, which is not borne out by the vote totals for the presidency. Turnout actually dropped 3% for the previous election. It's not borne out by the seats in Congress. Currently, the Republicans have a 3-seat majority in the House. They have a somewhat larger one in the Senate. But this is not massive mandate, but he believes that. And I think that will incite him to consider even more what we might see as radical proposals, because he believes the public's behind him.
The other thing that's going to be interesting, there are some policies that could be inflationary. The U.S. has done quite a bit to beat back inflation post-pandemic, and the U.S. central bank is supposed to be separate from the government, but the idea of interest rate hikes rather than cuts is not going to sit well with Donald Trump. Do you foresee an attempted change at the way the U.S. government is structured? I mean, I'm not asking you to get into Donald Trump's head necessarily, but he's not used to not getting what he wants.
Well, the truth is, he and the Republican Party are firm believers in what they call the unified executive theory. And they happen to have members right now on the Supreme Court who are sympathetic to that view as well. And in terms of this theory, he believes that there aren't any limits to what he can do in exercising his executive powers as president. So I suspect he will push and push and push until he's either forced back by a legal decision or some other kind of force.
You see Trump as a game changer.
The United States of America is no longer the shining light on the hill. No one really aspires to follow in the footsteps of the United States. I'm referring to other countries here. They are not an exemplar of democratic governance. They are not an exemplar of a civil society that treats all of its members with dignity and respect. What we are seeing is an American empire that's now heading into an autocratic phase, and its best days are behind them, not in front of them, no matter how often Trump says the opposite.
So, do you think the U.S. will be dramatically changed forever at the end of this 4-year term?
I'm not sure that the American institutions, American civil society, will be able to recover from what's gone on the last 8 years and what will happen in the next 4 years. I've tended to be optimistic about the United States and the ability, its resilience, its people's willingness to adapt. We now see signs that really is no longer the case. Americans have decided that they're not going to spend any more time on this business about race. Even though race has defined modern American politics since the end of the Civil War, they've decided, it's behind us. We don't want to talk about it. We're certainly not going to do anything about it. And it's going to continue to tear at the fabric of American society as a result.
What does that mean for Canada?
We're going to have a bumpy ride. We're going to find that become more and more necessary for us to broaden out our relationships with other states, to broaden out our economic relationship with other economies. And we're going to find that at times we're going to be very uncomfortable by our proximity to the United States.
That is a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Appreciate your time.
Well, you're welcome.
That's Wayne Petrozzi, Professor Emeritus, Department of Politics and Public Administration at Toronto Metropolitan University. And that wraps up this edition of The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Kris McCusker. Thanks for listening.